Have you ever entered a saint's room? No, I'm not talking about those ancient relics kept in European museums, behind untouchable glass cases and velvet ropes. I'm talking about entering the most intimate space of someone who lived not long ago, someone from our generation, someone who used the internet, played video games, and at the same time built a path of sanctity, so radical that it's shaking the foundations of how we understand faith in the 21st century. And what his mother reveals about that room, what she discovered there after Carlo's death, what continues happening in that space to this day, is going to completely change your way of seeing spirituality, suffering, and God's purposes in your life. Because what Antonia Acutis is about to reveal, what she found in that room and what she constantly repeats when showing Carlo's object saying, "He used to," is something traditional religion rarely has the courage to admit, that God transforms our greatest losses into the most powerful missions, that heaven and earth are much more connected than we were taught in church, and that sanctity isn't a distant goal for medieval monks, but an urgent call for young Christians navigating the chaos of the digital age. In the next few minutes, you're going to virtually enter that sacred room. You're going to know secrets the family kept for years. And you're going to understand why thousands of people from around the world make pilgrimages to simply be in that space where Carlo Acutis lived his last days and left a legacy that's winning souls for Christ faster than any modern evangelistic campaign. Get ready, because this story is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about faith, grief, and miracles. You know, there are moments in life when you walk into a place and you feel that something greater than ourselves exists there. You know what I mean? It's like when you visit the home of someone who marked your life in a profound way, that wise grandfather, that friend who inspired you, that person who seemed to have been sent by God. The air becomes different, the walls seem to hold secrets, and every object tells a story you want to understand. That's exactly how I felt when I first entered Carlo Acutis's room. There, in that simple and luminous space, I wasn't just standing before a room with furniture and personal belongings. I was facing a silent testimony of a life that seemed to have been written in the pages of the Bible. The faith that young man carried still pulsed in that environment, as if Christ himself had left his mark in every corner. And look, it's not every day you have the opportunity to enter the room of someone who may become a saint, right? Carlo wasn't a distant figure, one of those you only know from old portraits and dusty stories. He was a young man of our time, a boy who grew up with the internet, video games, and technology, but who chose to live spirituality in such a profound way that he touched the entire world. What impressed me most was realizing that sanctity doesn't need to be something distant or unattainable. You understand? Carlo Acutis lived among us not long ago, and yet he managed to transform his life into a true evangelical mission through technology. He created a website cataloging Eucharistic miracles throughout the world, showing Christian youth that you can use modern tools to glorify God and spread the gospel. And all of that started there, in that simple room but full of purpose. When you look around, you see the biblical study books he read, the objects he used in his prayer routine, and you begin to understand that every detail of that life was guided by genuine devotion. It wasn't posing, it wasn't empty religiosity, it was Christianity lived in practice, with authenticity and passion. Carlo attended church regularly, participated in services with enthusiasm, and found in praise and worship a way to connect with Jesus Christ in a deep and transformative manner. For me, who shared that space with him for a time, seeing how he transformed everyday moments into opportunities for spiritual growth was something that constantly challenged me. And you know what's most fascinating? His room isn't just a static memorial, a relic of the past that you visit with nostalgia. It's as if that space still vibrated with the energy of the mission Carlo left behind. When you enter there, you don't feel sadness or emptiness. On the contrary, you feel a living presence, as if his purpose was still in motion, as if every testimony of faith he inspired continued echoing through those walls. I remember conversations we had about religion, about how to reach young Christians who are drifting away from faith, and Carlo always said the answer was in showing that God is real, present, and active in our lives. He believed that sermons didn't need to be boring or disconnected from reality. They could be vibrant, relevant, full of life. And looking now at this room, I see that every piece of this space tells a story about a boy who decided his life would be a living testimony of Christ's love. And when you know this story up close, when you walk through this sacred space, something inside you changes because you realize that if Carlo managed to live that sanctity in the digital age, maybe you too can find your path of faith amid the chaos of the modern world. But entering that room also meant confronting something deeper and more painful, Because as luminous and hopeful as that space was, it was also the place where Carlo's absence was felt most intensely. Imagine what it's like for a mother to lose her 15-year-old son, a boy full of life, projects, dreams. Antonia, Carlo's mother, lived through the most devastating grief a human being can experience. She told me that in the first days after Carlo's departure, she simply couldn't enter that room without her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. It was as if every object in there screamed the absence of her beloved son, as if the walls themselves were crying with her. And forgetting wasn't an option because Carlo had left such deep marks in that space that ignoring them would be like denying he had existed. So Antonia made a decision many wouldn't understand. She decided to keep the room exactly as Carlo had left it, transforming it into a living memory of who he was and the mission he had embraced with such passion. The faith that sustained Antonia in those darkest days didn't come from complicated theological speeches or distant sermons. It came from the intimate, almost inexplicable certainty that Carlo hadn't really left the house. He had only changed his dwelling. He had passed from this temporal world to eternity with Christ. That profound conviction, nourished by years of authentic spirituality and constant prayer, is what allowed Antonia not to sink completely into pain. She once told me, her eyes filled with tears, but also with an inexplicable peace, that she felt Carlo's presence in an almost tangible way, not as a ghost from the past, but as someone who had reached fullness in God and was now interceding for the family from heaven. It was a faith that went beyond institutional religion, beyond Sunday service rituals. It was a visceral faith of a mother who refused to believe that death was the end of her son's story. And that room, instead of becoming a mausoleum of sadness, began to transform into something completely different. But how does a mother manage to transform the most painful space in the house into a place of hope? That was the question I asked myself for a long time. Antonia wasn't denying the pain. On the contrary, she confronted it every day by entering that room and seeing Carlo's shoes by the bed, his biblical study notebooks on the desk, the religious images he loved so much on the walls. But she chose to allow faith to guide her way of relating to that loss. Instead of closing the room and transforming it into a forbidden and dark space, she opened it so others could know Carlo's story, so other young Christians could be inspired by the testimony of faith of that boy who lived his devotion to Jesus Christ so intensely. The room became, then, a place where Carlo's physical absence constantly dialogued with his spiritual presence, a space where heaven and earth seemed to touch in a mysterious and consoling way. And it was precisely in this process of transforming pain into testimony that something extraordinary began to happen. Antonia intensified her Marian devotion after Carlo's death, not as an escape from reality, but as a way to seek comfort from the one who had also lost a son and deeply understood that pain. She began to pray with more fervor, to seek in Mary that maternal tenderness that only someone who had gone through the same suffering could offer. And inside that room, in the silent hours of dawn when the world slept and she remained there in prayer, Antonia began to experience something that goes far beyond what words can describe. These were moments of supernatural consolation, instants when she felt she wasn't alone in that space, that there was a feminine presence, sweet and powerful, that enveloped her like an invisible embrace. It wasn't imagination or self-suggestion, it was something real, palpable, that brought a peace that cannot be explained by psychology or human reason. The symbolism of the Day of Our Lady of Pilar began to take on profound meaning for Antonia. She told me that Carlo had a special devotion to Mary, and that he always asked the Mother of Christ to intercede for him and his family. After his departure, Antonia felt that Mary wasn't just interceding, she was actively present in the family's life, guiding every step, consoling every tear, transforming every moment of despair into an opportunity for spiritual growth. Carlo's room became, thus, a meeting place between human pain and divine consolation. It wasn't just a physical space with walls and a ceiling, it was a domestic sanctuary where God's presence manifested in subtle but undeniable ways. The spiritual experiences Antonia lived in there weren't dramatic or spectacular, but they were deeply transformative, small signs, impossible coincidences, sensations of peace in moments of extreme anguish, all pointing toward the certainty that God hadn't abandoned that family. And the most beautiful thing is that this silent peace wasn't exclusive to Antonia. I myself, spending time in that room, experienced something similar. It was as if the environment had a different quality. There was nothing visibly supernatural, no apparition or paranormal phenomenon, but there was a serenity that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. When the outside world was chaotic and noisy, that room offered a refuge of quietude and contemplation. It was the kind of place where one naturally felt inclined to pray, to reflect on life, to rethink priorities, and reconnect with what's essential. The spirituality Carlo had cultivated there during his short but intense life seemed to have permeated every corner of that space, creating an atmosphere that invited encounter with the divine. And that peace wasn't passive or escapist, it was an active peace that strengthened you to face challenges, that gave courage to continue the mission, that constantly reminded you that life doesn't end with physical death, but continues in eternity with Christ. But if all this was already extraordinary, what would come next would surpass any human expectation. Because God, in His infinite wisdom and love, was preparing an intervention that would completely transform that family's story. Antonia, who had already gone through the darkest valley of grief and had found comfort in faith and in Mary's consoling presence, was about to receive news that would change everything again. It was something no one expected, something that would defy all human logic and would show unequivocally that God doesn't just console in pain, He transforms, restores, and multiplies in ways our limited mind cannot anticipate. Antonia discovered, in a completely unexpected way, that she was pregnant. And it wasn't just one baby, it was two. Twins who were coming to fill that house with life again, to show that God's love is so great that it can take the most devastating loss and transform it into new hope. The arrival of Michelle and Francesca was like a living Eucharistic miracle in the midst of that family. Antonia told me, with tears of joy running down her face, that when she learned about the pregnancy, she immediately felt that this was much more than a biological coincidence. It was a direct answer from God to her prayers, a tangible sign that He hadn't forgotten her pain and was writing a new chapter in the Acutis family's story. Carlo's room, which had been a silent witness to the deepest grief, now became a meeting point between pain and promise, between absence and presence, between loss and restoration. It was as if God was saying, through those two babies growing in Antonia's womb, that life always conquers death, that hope always overcomes despair, that His plan is always greater than our suffering. And all of that resonated deeply with the testimony of faith Carlo had left. He always believed that God was real, active, and present in the lives of those who trust in Him. Antonia's pregnancy brought a new dimension to that room that previously seemed frozen in time. Now, when she entered there, she not only felt Carlo's spiritual presence, she also felt the new life pulsing inside her, reminding her that God is Lord of life and that His power to restore goes beyond any human loss. The twins Michelle and Francesca weren't a replacement for Carlo. That idea would be absurd and offensive. They were a new gift, a manifestation of God's multiplied love, proof that heaven and earth are much more connected than we imagine. And Carlo's room became the perfect symbol of that connection, a place where the memory of the son who had departed for eternity coexisted harmoniously with the expectation of the children who were about to arrive. It was as if the walls of that room had witnessed the complete cycle of Christian faith, life dedicated to Christ, death that isn't the end, and resurrection symbolized in the new life God was granting the family. And when Michelle and Francesca were finally born, the entire house filled with a different kind of energy. The baby cries, the laughter, the organized chaos of a house with twins, all of that contrasted deeply with the contemplative silence that had marked the period of grief. But it was a beautiful, necessary contrast that showed that life continues and that God never abandons those who trust in Him. Antonia, now with 2 babies in her arms and her heart divided between the joy of new motherhood and the eternal longing for the son who had departed, found in that experience a deeper understanding of God's love. She understood, in a visceral way that only those who go through extreme experiences can understand, that God doesn't cause suffering, but uses suffering to reveal His glory in ways we would never imagine. Carlo's room, that sacred space that had witnessed so much pain, was now also witness to divine faithfulness, a constant reminder that God transforms all things for the good of those who love Him. As Antonia reorganized her life around the twins, she began to understand with more clarity the profound meaning of everything she had lived through. It wasn't a coincidence that Carlo had departed so young. His short life was a journey perfectly designed by God, each day lived with intensity and purpose, each action oriented toward sanctity. And now, showing Carlo's room to visitors from around the world who came to know the story of the young man who may become a saint, Antonia found herself constantly repeating a phrase that resonated with profound meaning. He used to. She would say that when showing the desk where Carlo studied the Bible, when pointing to the bed where he knelt for his nightly prayer, when touching the objects he used in his daily devotional time. He used to spend hours here studying Eucharistic miracles, she would say. He used to wake up early to attend Mass before going to school, she remembered tenderly. Each he used to was like a window into Carlo's inner life, a revelation of how that ordinary boy had lived an extraordinary life of daily sanctity. Antonia explained to me that by showing those objects and sharing those memories, she wasn't simply remembering the past, she was revealing a divine purpose that had guided every moment of Carlo's life. She understood, with a clarity that only the Holy Spirit can give, that her son's life hadn't been truncated or prematurely interrupted. It had been complete, perfect in its brevity, fulfilling exactly the plan God had designed from before the foundation of the world. The room became, then, a place of revelation, where visitors from around the world could understand that sanctity isn't something reserved for medieval monks or distant mystics. It's a call for all of us, especially for young Christians living in the digital age. The clarity that God had transformed pain into mission became evident when Antonia began receiving testimonies from people who had been touched by Carlo's story. Mothers who had lost children found comfort in knowing that Antonia had also gone through that dark valley and had found hope on the other side. Young people disconnected from faith rediscovered the gospel by learning the story of a boy like them who had used technology to glorify God. Entire families renewed their commitment to Christianity after visiting that simple but powerful room. And all of that confirmed what Antonia already knew in her heart. Every object kept there, every detail preserved, every memory shared had a profound spiritual meaning. It wasn't vain nostalgia or morbid attachment to the past. It was the understanding that God uses even our most painful losses to fulfill eternal purposes that go far beyond our limited comprehension. Carlo's room was physical proof that God transforms memories into mission, grief into testimony, absence into spiritual presence that continues impacting lives. But the story of Carlo's room didn't freeze in the past. It continues developing in extraordinary ways to this day. Because that space isn't just a museum of a potential saint's life, it's a place where Carlo's presence continues to be felt in ways that defy rational explanation. Antonia told me about countless testimonies from people who visited the room and experienced something supernatural and inexplicable peace, a profound certainty that their prayers would be answered, a tangible sensation that Carlo was there, interceding for them with Christ. These were stories of inexplicable healings, sudden conversions, small and large miracles that occurred after people spent time in that sacred space. And I myself witnessed some of these experiences. I saw people enter skeptical and leave transformed. I saw tears of emotion running down the faces of people who normally didn't believe in anything supernatural. The twins Michelle and Francesca, now growing up in that house marked by Carlo's spiritual presence, are themselves a sign of that continuing presence. Antonia told me that as they grew, the twins naturally developed a deep connection with the brother they never knew physically. They asked questions about Carlo, want to know stories from his life, asked to pray near his objects in the room, and in a completely spontaneous way, without anyone encouraging them, Michelle and Francesca began showing signs of a precocious spirituality that very much resembles Carlo's. They love participating in church services, are interested in biblical studies in an unusual way for children their age, find in praise and worship a genuine source of joy. It's as if Carlo's presence had permeated not just the room, but the entire family dynamic, influencing even the siblings born after his departure. And the miracles attributed to Carlo's intercession multiply around the world, many of them connected in some way to that room where he lived and cultivated his sanctity. There are testimonies of faith coming from all continents, people who prayed asking for Carlo's intercession and experienced concrete answers to their prayers. Medically inexplicable healings, dramatic conversions, impossible family restorations, all attributed to that young man who lived only 15 years, but left a legacy that crosses borders and cultures. The communion of saints, that theological concept that sometimes seems abstract and distant, becomes a living and palpable reality when you know the story of Carlo's room. Because there, in that simple but powerful space, you perceive that heaven and earth aren't as separated as we imagine, that those who departed for eternity continue to be present in mysterious but real ways, interceding for us, guiding us, reminding us that death isn't the end, but just a transition to full life in Christ. And while the entire world discovers Carlo Acutis' story, inside that house in Italy, something equally extraordinary, but more intimate, occurs the reconstruction of a family that was deeply marked by loss, but chose to allow faith to guide their healing path. Antonia told me that raising Michelle and Francesca in that house, with Carlo's room preserved as a domestic sanctuary, brought unique challenges, but also unexpected blessings. The twins grow up knowing they have a brother who intercedes for them from heaven, that their house isn't like other houses, because there dwells in a special way God's presence manifested through Carlo's testimony. They learn from a young age that life has an eternal purpose, that each day is an opportunity to live spirituality with authenticity, that sanctity isn't something unattainable, but a path anyone can walk with faith and dedication. Today, Michelle and Francesca are vibrant children full of life, with unique personalities and their own dreams. But their childhood is illuminated by the legacy of the brother they never knew physically, but know deeply in spirit. They listen to the stories Antonia tells about Carlo, how he loved helping the poor, how he dedicated time to teaching catechism to younger children, how he used his computer skills to create tools that helped people better know Jesus Christ. And these stories aren't just entertainment or nostalgia, they're living lessons about how to live the gospel in the modern world. The twins see in Carlo a model of how to be young and Christian at the same time, how to navigate through the temptations and challenges of contemporary life without losing connection with the sacred, how to transform personal talents into instruments of evangelization. Family life completely reorganized around faith, not in an oppressive or fanatical way, but in a natural and organic manner that reflects the profound understanding that God is the center of everything. Carlo's room became part of the house's daily routine, not as a forbidden or overly solemn place, but as a space where the family gathers to pray, to reflect, to remember they're connected to something much greater than themselves. Antonia told me that frequently, after Sunday service at church, They return home and spend time together in Carlo's room, talking about the sermon they heard, reflecting on how to apply the Bible's teachings in their daily lives. It's a family dynamic profoundly marked by faith, but also incredibly human, full of laughter, trivial conversations, moments of tension and reconciliation, everything that characterizes any family, but with a constant awareness that they're living a story that has eternal dimensions. And all of this reveals something profoundly beautiful about how God works in our lives. Carlo Acutis' legacy isn't limited to his brief earthly existence, nor restricted to the walls of his room. It's a legacy that continues expanding across generations, touching lives he never knew physically. And that expansion began with a mother who refused to allow grief to destroy her, who chose to transform her pain into testimony, who decided to open the doors of her son's room so the world could know the story of a young man who lived sanctity in a radical but accessible way. Antonia assumed a public mission that goes far beyond preserving Carlo's memory. She became an evangelizer, a bearer of hope for suffering families, a living testimony that God restores what seemed irreparably broken. Antonia's public mission has taken her to travel around the entire world, sharing Carlo's story at conferences, retreats, young Christian gatherings, biblical study programs, special services in churches in various countries. She carries with her photos of the room, objects that belong to Carlo, and primarily her personal testimony of how faith sustained her family in the darkest moment. And people respond to that testimony in an extraordinary way, because it's not a theoretical discourse about religion. It's not an academic exposition about theology. It's the raw and real story of a mother who lost her son, but found in faith the strength to continue and the certainty that the story didn't end with death. Antonia speaks about prayer as a powerful weapon against despair, about Christianity as a source of genuine hope, about Jesus Christ as the only one capable of giving meaning to human suffering. The exhibition of Eucharistic miracles that Carlo created has become one of the most powerful evangelization tools of the modern era. That project he developed in his room, using his computer and his technical skills, now circulates around the world as a traveling exhibition that has touched millions of lives. People who had never heard of Eucharistic miracles are fascinated to discover that there's scientific evidence of supernatural phenomena related to the Eucharist. Skeptical young people begin to question their disbelief when confronted with facts that defy material explanation. Entire families rediscover faith by understanding that God continues manifesting himself in concrete and verifiable ways in our world. And all of that was born in that simple room, from the hands of a teenager who deeply believed that technology could be used to glorify God and spread the gospel. Carlo's room became, thus, part of a global testimony. It's not just a physical space in Italy. It's a symbol of how sanctity can flourish anywhere when there's a willing heart and genuine faith. But perhaps the most impacting aspect of all this is how Antonia's story and Carlo's room became a source of concrete hope for other families facing devastating losses. Because as numerous as words of comfort and theological promises may be, when you lose a child, the pain is so visceral that no speech seems sufficient. It's at that moment that real testimonies from people who went through the same dark valley and found light on the other side become infinitely more powerful than any theological treatise. Antonia constantly receives letters, messages, visits from bereaved parents who seek in her story some kind of hope to continue. And she doesn't offer them easy answers or cheap comfort. She shares her own journey with all its complexity, pain, and also with the moments of divine grace that sustained her. Antonia counsels these parents with an authority that only those who have gone through fire can have. She tells them that yes, the pain is real and devastating, that there are no shortcuts for the grieving process, that it's okay to cry and feel lost. But she also reminds them that faith isn't a magic shield against suffering. It's an anchor that keeps us from completely shipwrecking when the waves of pain threaten to drown us. She speaks about the importance of maintaining the prayer routine even when praying seems impossible, about seeking community in church instead of isolating yourself, about allowing the testimony of faith of the son or daughter who departed to continue living through our actions and words. Antonia emphasizes that keeping Carlo's room open, transforming it into a place of testimony instead of a closed sanctuary of pain, was fundamental to her healing process because it gave her a concrete purpose, a way to channel maternal love that no longer had anywhere to go physically. The hope Antonia transmits isn't abstract or disconnected from reality. It's a hope embodied in her own story, verifiable in the existence of Michelle and Francesca, tangible in the testimonies of miracles attributed to Carlo, evident in the peace that inhabits that room despite all the pain it witnessed. She doesn't promise the pain will disappear or that it will be easy, but she guarantees, with the certainty of someone who lived it in her own flesh, that God sustains when everything breaks, that faith is capable of transforming even the most devastating losses into powerful testimonies, that death doesn't have the last word when we trust in Christ. And Carlo's room becomes, in that narrative, a perfect symbol of how God continues writing the story even after we think everything has ended. The walls that witnessed the last breath of a young saint now witness the prayers of thousands of people seeking comfort, the tears of bereaved parents finding hope, the laughter of twins who represent life that continues and renews itself. And it's precisely this profound understanding that God continues writing the story that brings me to the final point of this reflection on Carlo Acutis' room. Because when all is said and done, when all the tears have been shed and all the testimonies shared, what remains is a silent but powerful invitation, the invitation to trust in divine providence even when nothing makes sense, especially when everything seems lost. That room, with its disarming simplicity and undeniable spiritual power, reminds us that our lives are much more than the years we spend on this earth, that each day is an opportunity to build an eternal legacy, that sanctity isn't a privilege of a few chosen ones, but a universal call for all who desire to follow Christ with authenticity. Surrendering all pain to providence doesn't mean passive resignation or defeatist acceptance of what hurts us. It means actively trusting that God, in His infinite wisdom, can weave meaning even in the most painful threads of our existence. It means believing, as Antonia believed in her darkest moments, that a child's death isn't the end of their story, but only a transition to a fuller dimension of life in Christ. It means maintaining faith and prayer even when heaven seems silent, continuing to attend church and participate in worship even when nothing seems to make sense, insisting on biblical studies and the pursuit of spirituality even when everything in us just wants to give up. Carlo Acutis becomes, in that context, a perfect example for this generation, a young man who lived in the digital world but didn't let himself be enslaved by it, who used technology as an evangelization tool instead of distraction, who found in praise and worship a source of authentic joy amid a culture obsessed with superficial pleasures. The Acutis family today is a living testimony that heaven isn't just an abstract concept or a distant promise. It's a reality that touches our lives in concrete and transformative ways. Carlo's room is physical proof of that connection between heaven and earth, that those who departed continue to be present in ways that go beyond our understanding, that God truly transforms memories into eternal mission. And the room remains there, simple and luminous, keeping secrets of daily sanctity and whispering to all who have ears to hear, life is worth living with faith, love is stronger than death, and God truly transforms everything for the good of those who love Him and trust in His infinite providence. So what are you going to do now with everything you just learned? Are you just going to close this page and return to your routine? Or are you going to allow Carlo Acutis and his family's story to truly transform how you live your faith? Because you see, this story isn't just a beautiful, inspiring narrative to move you for a few minutes. It's a direct, personal call for you to reconsider how you're living your own spirituality. How many times have you postponed that conversation with God you know you need to have? How many times have you thought sanctity was something impossible for you, reserved for others, for the more spiritual ones? Carlo Acutis was 15 years old, and he managed to build a legacy that today touches millions of lives. What's stopping you from starting today to live your faith with that same intensity, that same authenticity? Is it fear of others' judgment? Is it spiritual laziness? Is it simply that you've never really believed God could use someone like you? I want you to ask yourself these questions honestly, without lying to yourself. If Antonia could transform her deceased son's room into a sanctuary of hope that consoles thousands of bereaved parents, what could you transform in your own life if you truly allowed God to act? If Carlo could use his passion for computers to create an exhibition of Eucharistic miracles that evangelizes around the world, what dormant talents do you have that could be used for God's glory? You can no longer use the excuse that you don't have special gifts or that you're not spiritual enough. Carlo was an ordinary teenager who played video games, and yet he lived extraordinary sanctity. The question isn't whether you're capable, but whether you're willing. Are you willing to transform your room, your home, your work, your entire life into a living testimony of God's presence? Or are you going to continue living that lukewarm, comfortable faith that doesn't bother anyone and doesn't transform anything? The story of Carlo's room teaches us something fundamental. God never wastes our sufferings. Every tear you've shed, every loss you've experienced, every moment when you felt God was absent, all of that can be transformed into powerful testimony that touches other lives. But that will only happen if you choose faith instead of bitterness, hope instead of despair, mission instead of self-pity. Antonia could have closed Carlo's room and lived secluded in her pain for the rest of her life. No one would have judged her for that. But she chose to open that door, to share that story, to allow her son's memory to become light for others. What door do you need to open in your own life? What pain do you need to transform into testimony? What talent do you need to put at the service of God's kingdom? Time passes, my friends, and we don't know how many days we have left. Carlo didn't know he would only have 15 years, but he lived each day as if it were a sacred opportunity to glorify God. Are you going to do the same, or are you going to continue postponing your spiritual life for when you have more time? I invite you, starting today, to make a concrete decision. Maybe it's returning to the church you abandoned. Maybe it's resuming that prayer routine you let slide. Maybe it's forgiving someone you refused to forgive for years. Maybe it's simply kneeling in your own room and saying to God, "Here I am. Use me, transform me, make me an instrument of your glory." Carlo Acutis' story proves that God can do extraordinary things through ordinary people who simply make themselves available to him. The question isn't whether you're qualified, the question is whether you're available. So are you available? Because the world needs more Carlo Acutises, more authentic testimonies of faith lived with radicality and love. And maybe God is calling you, right at this moment, to be the testimony for your family, for your friends, for your community. Don't let this opportunity pass. Life is short, eternity is long, and what you do today with your faith will determine the legacy you leave. If this story touched you, if it stirred something in you that you can't ignore, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and activate notifications. Because we'll continue sharing stories like this one, real testimonies of people who have allowed God to transform their lives and who today inspire thousands of others. Don't just be a spectator of these stories, become the protagonist of your own faith story. Leave a comment below sharing what concrete decision you're going to make today after hearing Carlo Acutis' story. Commit publicly, because when we verbalize our intentions, they become more real, more concrete. And know that we're praying for each of you watching this video, that God touches your heart and uses you in extraordinary ways. Subscribe now, activate the notification bell, and let's continue together this faith journey that transforms lives. May God bless you abundantly, and may Carlo Acutis' story continue inspiring generations of young Christians to live sanctity in this modern world that so desperately needs authentic witnesses of Christ's love.